Hey everyone, Box Gods here, and today we're going to be taking a look at Monsoon's new modular reservoir system, or MMRS for short. Before I dig into that too far, I want to kind of go over the genesis behind the design. Tube reservoirs as a type are probably the most popular of all the reservoirs. Generally, if you go to a LAN or something like that and you look at your basic tower PC, almost probably 90% of the time, if you were looking down into the case, motherboard right here, video cards, and then right off to the right of the motherboard you would see a reservoir about right here. I'm not saying that the reservoirs are always mounted there, but in the world of reservoirs, that's pretty much the missionary position, because it seems like that's about what you see 90% of the time. You might see them mounted at the bottom of the reservoir, or bottom of the case, but generally they're kind of like right there. And one of the reasons we mod and do all these water cooling and things like that is to be original and to stand out and to express our creativity. So one of my goals was to give you the ability to have a reservoir that was flexible enough that you could configure it exactly the way you needed it to be for your build, rather than having to force your build around the reservoir. One way to think of that is, again, that position where you've mounted the reservoir to the right of your motherboard. Generally it has a couple ports in the top, a couple ports in the bottom, and you have a tube that comes out of the top and the bottom, which in and of itself is kind of weird, because if you think about it, the reservoir is right here, and pretty much everything you want to connect to, with the exception of maybe the radio that you've got mounted on the top, is off to the left. So it would be nice if things kind of went that direction instead of up or down. Even in the bottom of your case, if you've got the reservoir mounted down here at the bottom, you've got tubes sticking out of either end, and again, it would be better if everything could be heading in the direction of the top. Also, you're sort of restricted in how far out from what you mounted on, how far out it comes, or how high up it comes. That's just a few of the things that I wanted to get around, because like if you're installing the reservoir, if you've ever been in that situation, you know what I mean, where basically the only choice you have with an off-the-shelf kind of one-size-fits-all reservoir is a height adjustment. You can adjust it up or down in your case, and that's kind of it. So when you're installing it, you think to yourself, oh man, I wish this thing was about 2 inches longer, or it had some ports coming out the side that kind of went over towards my CPU, and I guess one daydreaming, I wish there were some ports over here to the left that would connect to my video card, and I wish it would stick out a little bit further, and pretty soon you're kind of wishing you had this, that, or the other, but basically you're kind of stuck with what you got, because it's a one-size-fits-all off-the-shelf reservoir. As you're going to see as I go through all these bits and pieces, this is anything but that, because it lets you basically just configure one of thousands of different configurations that's exactly what you need for your specific build. I guess I'll start with the tube, basically, so I can clear some space here. The tube comes in all of our Monsoon colors, matched to our tube, our hardline acrylic and PETG tube exactly. It also is matched to the lights, because I kind of liked everything to match. I don't know if this will show up on the camera, but this is the red reservoir lights that go with this, and you'll see how these fit later on. They're exactly matched to it. With a few exceptions, all of the lighting matches the tubes. The exceptions would be the clear tube, obviously, or the black tube, and we actually do have a black tube for this, which is not something, although it looks amazing, it's not something you would typically do with one of those off-the-shelf reservoirs, because you can't see what's inside. I'll show you some of the configurations a little later, and you'll see why that actually not only does it look amazing, but works well with the modular system. Tube diameter is 60 millimeters. Comes in 6 lengths from 50 millimeters to 300 millimeters in 50 millimeter increments. So that's 50, 100 millimeter, 150, 200, 250, 300. For those of you who think in inches, that's 2 inches, 4 inches, 6 inches, 8 inches, 10 inches, and 12 inches. And again, color matched to our Monsoon PETG and acrylic tube. Get these out of the way here. So we've got some room to think. Alright, I guess the best place to start would be to sort of look at one of the reservoirs. And this is that basic configuration that we were talking about, where you basically have imports facing up and down. And you can do that too, of course, if that happens to fit your build. You can see what I was talking about, how the lights exactly match the tube color. These are our 25 millimeter mounts. We'll kind of go over that in a minute. Set this aside for now. This reservoir, this one thing to keep in mind when you see these is I'll have 5 or 6 different assemblies to show you, but that's just 5 or 6 of thousands of possible combinations, because again, you can configure it to exactly what you need for your specific build. So keep that in mind when you see these. You may or may not like the configuration or the colors or whatever. It doesn't matter, because you can build exactly what you want for your project. So this features our basic end caps, so I'll kind of start there. These are the basic end caps right here. They come in a 0 port, a 1 port, and a 3 port. They have mounting holes on them so that you can mount these 60 degrees left or 60 degrees right. They are molded from nylon. I don't know if you can probably tell from the video, these are not little girly weight parts. These are heavy duty, we really mean it, solidly molded parts. This is what we call a basic end cap, because all it has is ports on the end. This is just like your basic reservoir. Then there is a version that we've added end port or side ports to. It's basically like that one, except it has added side ports, and it comes in a 0 port, 1 port, and 3 ports, and then of course the 2 on the side. And you'll see how this fits in an assembly. This is an example right here. On the end you've got a 3-port basic cap, and then we've added 2 side ports and with no ports on the bottom. And what that would do is, if you had it in your case mounted again in that common position, you could, if you want to, you could rotate this 60 degrees left and have the tube coming out towards, say right about there would be your video cards or whatever you wanted to do. And of course you could build it in different lengths. This has the 25 millimeter mounts. I'll get to the mounts in a little bit. The next one of the molded parts is a coupler. And what that allows you to do is attach multiple tube segments together. It also allows you to put ports anywhere along the length of the reservoir that you're building in 50 millimeter increments. And an example of that would be sticking with that red color. I don't know if that's in the frame or not, but this allows us to have ports in the middle of the reservoir. And if I wanted the ports to be here instead, I could have used a 50 millimeter segment of tube here and a 150 millimeter segment here. So you can just vary the lengths to move these any place you want along the length of it. This is also a good time to get back to the black tube that I mentioned. I don't know if it shows up in the video or not, but I configured this one with red tube. That looks like it's the 200 millimeter tube, 200 millimeter tube, and a 50 millimeter clear tube. If you were using the solid black that I talked about, you'd still want to have one segment of it somewhere that was clear so that you could kind of make sure that your reservoir was topped off and everything was okay. In this one I also added light to just the middle segment of it. I've got the tall mounting legs. These are the 50 millimeter mounting legs. And I've added a twin bulb UV CCFL, so if I had a fluid running through this that had a UV fluid in it, I could have this be red because of the tube, and then have this section of it be lit up so that the UV color showed. And of course, again, you could mix it and match it so that it, the clear was here. Sorry about that. The memory card was full. Another thing I wanted to point out real quick is the chain gun fittings here. You see, this is the red tension rods matching the red chain gun fittings, and then I've just to switch things up a little bit, I used a free center fittings right there, and I think those are 1/2 by 3/4. You can see how nicely that matches the shape there. It's just designed to look really nice together. This is another example of the coupler right there. You can see that I basically just went, I don't know if that shows in there, went right in the middle. Tension rods. Oh, this is the frosted pattern that I mentioned. The tube comes in the lighter colors, which are the UV green, the clear, and the, I don't know if that shows, that's the lighter blue or the UV blue. Those colors come in 2 different frost variations. One of them is just completely frosted, of course, and then the other is what we call, it's kind of silly, but we call that the warp core because it kind of has that warp core sort of look to it. You can see that better when it's installed, of course, because of the tension rods and all that other stuff, it just gives it a really, I mean, when you feel this thing's just nice. And that was we're talking about the coupler. Before I get into the rest of the molded parts, I can just real quick go over the tension rods, because when you look at the reservoir, basically the components you're going to have, the molded components will be the Endcaps, whichever end cap you choose, and there's a couple others that I'll show you still. You may or may not have a coupler in the center, and then what makes all that work is the tension rods, which basically just draw the whole thing together, create tension on the O-rings that are inside. I'll go over all the assembly, the different assembly steps. They're really easy to assemble. I'll kind of go over those in some separate videos so this doesn't get too long. That basically just goes over how to assemble a basic and then how to do some of the more complex or involved configurations. Again, LEDs are color matched. Or excuse me, not LEDs, but the CCFLs. You see here the blue. It makes a big difference, and I'll go over the CCFLs a bit more when we get to that, but back to the tension rods. The tension rods are actually solid rods, and they are machined from 316 marine grade stainless steel. I don't know if it'll show, but there is a wrench flats. There are wrench flats on the end of each rod, and those don't actually show when they're assembled, because when you assemble it into the tube, those disappear. Again, I don't know if that'll show, but let's hope it does. And these are available in all 10 of our color finishes that match everything else, again, right down to the screws. The screws are included with the tension rods. And you see how they go together. In this case, these were the black tension rods they came with black screws. So the tension rods are available in 6 lengths to match the tubes that you saw, which are the 50 millimeter, 100 millimeter, 150, 200, 250, and 300, or 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and 12 inch. It comes 6 to a package. Speaking of packaging, this might be a good time to mention that everything here, all the different configurations you see, are configurations that I assembled. None of these are actually sold pre-configured, with the exception of the standalone pump, and I'll cover this one a little bit later. The reason why this one comes pre-assembled is basically because there's not a lot of option to it. Again, I'll cover that in a little bit. All the components are actually sold individually. They're individually packaged. Like this is, I haven't covered this part yet, but they come in. I try to keep the packaging fairly basic so that we can keep costs down. What that allows you to do, again, is configure exactly what you need without having to buy a bunch of things that you don't need. It also gives you the ability to, it never fails. If you're serious about doing this and you're trying to do something amazing, when you start your build, it never fails that you put the reservoir in there and you go, oh man, I wish I'd have thought about putting some ports right there, because how awesome would it be to, and you start thinking of things you want to change. With a modular reservoir system like this, you're not sort of just stuck with that. You don't have to have that feeling like, God, I wish I'd have been able to do this or that. So you're not totally satisfied with the build that you end up with. With the modular system, you just basically pop onto your favorite reseller's website and pick the piece you need, and in a couple of days it's there. That also keeps you from having to get 20 extra plugs that come with a reservoir that you didn't need. And later on, if you're going to upgrade your build, like say you decide you're just going to do your CPU in the water cooling loop for right now, because in a few months you're getting whatever the newest video cards are going to be. You can build your system now, and then in 2 months when you get your new cards, you can then just add a coupler or whatever you need, whatever you need for your build. You can very easily just add those parts. Or in 2 years when you're building a new rig, you may want to switch to blue or something from red and make it a little longer or whatever, but you still don't have to buy the entire reservoir all over again. You can just add the few pieces that you need. All right. Next up I want to cover, I thought I had one out here, but I guess I don't. It's, let's see, do I have one open? I don't. Well, there's I guess I can just use this. I forgot to have one out here, but this part that you see right here in the end, That is a D5. Obviously, it's a D5 pump end, and what that allows you to do basically is just connect one or more D5s to your tube reservoir. This is a dual. Obviously, this one you would be using horizontally. You couldn't really mount it upright unless you just left the top as a dummy, just simply because the pump wouldn't draw water. But this one has our grasshopper mounts, which I'll cover. This is also the black chrome. I don't know if it shows, but although this is this is not personally my ideal choices, it's just pretty gorgeous, you know. I did have one right here. It is right here. This is the molded. These things are like hockey pucks. I just want to really get that point across that these are very, very heavy-duty, durable parts. This is the molded D5 pump end. This allows you to attach a pump to the reservoirs. Pretty basic stuff. This part is we call them fill or drain ports, and what that allows you to do is essentially add a remote fill or drain port to the tube reservoir, which is one of the things that I just really, really enjoy about the new system. These parts are kind of amazing. They work in conjunction with these machined, I don't know if this will show, they come in a round or a square. You can choose whichever one fits your build better. There is a notch in it that accepts an O-ring. I have one right here. This is the black. I don't know if you can see, but there's an O-ring right there. And what happens is, as you insert this, that O-ring will press against this edge right here and create a seal, so that when you're filling your loop, if you get carried away and fill too much, there's a catch basin that catches the overflow, and it doesn't allow the extra overflow to go down through your case and then leak into the inside. The other feature, that's its primary purpose, but the thing I'm most excited about is that it allows, the reason why it telescopes is so it allows you to have varying case thickness. So if you're just using an aluminum case, it would be a little bit, that's a millimeter right there. This will allow you to go from 1 to 6 millimeter thickness for your case panel. So if you're using an acrylic case or wood or an ammo box or something that's thicker than a standard case, this will allow it to telescope and adapt. There's also one other really interesting aspect to that telescoping, which I'm going to cover in a minute, but for those of you who don't necessarily grasp why we have this extra metal plate here, this is a simulated case panel. This isn't actually part of the system, but it gives you an idea that the metallic portion of that actually mounts to the outside of your case. Then again, you could use a square if you wanted to. And it comes in all 10 Monsoon color finishes, and you can match the plugs and all that. I'm not sure if it actually shows, but there's also about a half-inch or 12 millimeter deep catch basin there that will catch any overflow. And this is the molded end cap. That's the fill port. It has 50 millimeter tension rods. That's the UV blue tube in 50 millimeters, and it has a basic end cap with one port. You can see the blue screws that match. Basically, this would be inside your case, say at the top, as a reservoir just to have extra fluid in there that you topped off, and it might go down to your pump or other parts of your loop. That gives you an idea of kind of the basic functionality of that. What that allows you to do that's kind of interesting, though, is that first of all, you wouldn't have to mount it outside if you didn't want to, because it does give the end a really, like, this is the warp core frosted tube, and if it was mounted inside like that, it gives the end of the tube sort of a weapon of mass destruction bomb sort of look. It's very mechanical. It does have that warp core look to it. It looks kind of, it's really interesting. But what I'll let you do if you're mounting this externally, like say if this was the top of your case, you now have the ability to move this anywhere that you want within the case. And it doesn't have to be mounted at the top. It could be mounted to the front or the back, or anywhere you want. But it lets you move it, like say your motherboard is right here, and your CPU block right there. You can move that over, and then just have the one of the ports come out and just bang a hard left straight down right to the block. You can now have this floating anywhere you want in your case, which is, in my mind, kind of what we sort of envision when we think of tube reservoirs. That's kind of what makes it the popular choice, is to have that tube floating in space kind of feeling, which you, again, don't really get when it's mounted to the right of your motherboard, like everybody else is doing. The telescoping aspect that I mentioned that makes it kind of really fascinating, I'll kind of leave this here for a second. In your mind, just picture this not being here. We've assume you're using the reason I call this a fill and drain port is because it can be mounted on the bottom of the case also. You could actually have mounted this reservoir on the bottom and just have it as a drain place for your system, because if you're using a rigid tube, one of the few things about rigid tube that isn't great, I mean, it looks wonderful and gives you awesome tube runs and it's got great performance and all those things, but filling and draining a loop can be kind of a pain in the butt because there's not really, because the tube's rigid, nothing can move to allow you to open the loop either to fill or to drain it. But if you've got one of these set up on the bottom of your case, you basically just slide the case forward until this is slightly off of your desk. You put a bucket or a trash can underneath it, take the plug out. It drains just like you were draining the oil in your car. After you've drained the loop, you put the plug back in, open the top up, and then you can either refill or top off, or you could actually do it a couple of times if you were trying to flush your loop. Back to that telescoping feature, because you have the ability to have that slide up to 6 millimeters, say you wanted to run from the top of your case a fill port, have the tube reservoir travel the entire height of your case to the bottom, and have a drain port in one continuous section, and then have couplers along the way that were pointing off towards, say, your CPU block, and then another one that was pointing off towards your video cards, whatever you wanted to set up for your system. As awesome as that is, the problem you would encounter is that the 50 millimeter increments that you're able to do might not line up exactly, probably get you within 6 or 8 millimeters. Because you have the ability to telescope this, there's a spacer kit that sells separately, and I don't have one to show you, unfortunately, but there's a spacer that goes right here that would absorb that extra distance. It would be, say, like that. Then you just put the screws in and screw it down. It would look like that reservoir had been custom built to be the exact height of the interior of your case, which just really opens up a lot of really interesting options as far as configuring your loops go. Next up, probably cover mounts. The mounts come in 3 different heights. This is a low profile 12 millimeter or 1/2 inch mount. We call it the grasshopper. It comes with these 2 little load spreaders that go on the back side. Just to give you an example, this is the pump. It comes stock with the grasshopper mount. Actually, also the only part that comes pre-assembled. Got dust all over it, sorry. And again, this is just to simulate your case panel. This part isn't actually part of the product, but on the back side of it, you have these load spreaders that do exactly what that term says. It just spreads the weight of your reservoir or your pump out to a wider area so that it's not concentrated in one small spot of the case. The other feature of that is if you've missed your dimensions slightly and you need to make the hole slightly ovular or whatever with the drill to get the screws to fit, these will cover up kind of that mistake and nobody will ever know about it. Again, just so you can see what they look like. This has the load spreaders talking about. You wouldn't actually see those when it was mounted. They'd be on the other side. But the next mount is the 25 millimeter or 1 inch. And again, it has the load spreader. And all of the molded parts are designed to fit all of the mounts. So they are totally interchangeable. Again, they'll allow you to rotate 60 degrees left or right. You're also not restricted to every component facing the same direction either. If you were using both of these, you could have this one facing 60 degrees left, this one straight, or facing 60 degrees right. You're not limited to having everything facing one direction. 12 millimeter 1/2 inch, 25 millimeter 1 inch, and 50 millimeter 2 inch mounts. What's next? I covered the pump. CCFLs. This is the twin bulb CCFL. I don't know if it shows, but it actually has a little assembly right there on each end of it. This is the sleeve cord. Has black plugs. It comes in all the correct lengths for all the tube sections. And it comes in color matched to all the different reservoirs. They're also not those red CCFLs that you see that are a clear tube with red bulbs, which actually look kind of pink. These are actually colored acrylic tube that have very bright white CCFL bulbs inside. They give you just really good light. The way that mounts to the, I'll show you the red version here. It mounts, I don't know if you can see in here. This is the actual little spacer thing that goes, or the load spreader that goes in the back. But what this allows you to do is, if you ever have a CCFL bulb go out on you, you don't have to, especially with rigid tube, it would be a big pain in the butt to try and get the bulbs changed. You can just undo two of the screws, one of the mount comes out, the reservoir is still held in place, pull the bulbs out, put the new bulbs in, replace the mount without having to tear your entire loop down. We also sell a version of the CCFLs. This is actually two bulbs that come in a kit. They're two individual bulbs. I don't want to take it apart, but I don't know if you can see the ends on those. They are molded and they are the smallest, cleanest ends I could possibly design. They're also exactly matched to the CCFLs that you use for your reservoirs. So what that lets you do is have the light that's in your reservoir match other places that you light in your kit. And they come in, I don't know, 6 or 8 different. A couple things I want to cover with about the CCFLs also. These are designed, I don't know if you've ever used sort of the basic CCFLs that you see. These, again, this is the individual. It's two individuals that are sold in a kit of two. About the ends, normally you see, it's kind of a much bigger tube. I don't know if you can tell how small the diameter of the tube is here. It's as small as I could possibly get it. And the ends are not those big clunky clear cubes. Again, they're as small as you could possibly get them. There's no, double back tape that ends up falling off as soon as your case warms up a little bit. They actually use screws, which are included. There's a drill bit included in the kit. They're sold as just the bulbs. There's no inverter with the little blue inverter that buzzes and the big wire harness that's just gross. Nobody that's serious that does this to do a good job actually uses that crap. It ends up in a box somewhere. You just pay for it and then either throw it away or, I have a box full of that stuff from the early days. These are designed for guys that are doing just extremely clean, beautiful builds. It's basically the lights that I would want to use. That's how I went about the design for these. There's a third one that's not shown here. These are designed, I showed you that they go behind if you look at it like this, you don't actually see the lights when they're mounted. They're actually set up in such a way that they're in between two of the bars, so the bars aren't, or the tension rods are not blocking the light. And what they're designed to do for this particular CCFL bulb, think of this as the $1 million PC murder mod type, where you want very theatrical lighting, where you see the effect of the light or the light itself, but you don't really see the bulb so much. It's not, a bulb glaring in your face. It gives you very controlled lighting of your environment. And because they're matched to the standalone CCFLs, you can then mount these elsewhere in your case and light other areas and have the light exactly match. The other advantage to them, this particular one that I showed you, it has the 50 millimeter mounts to really bring the reservoir out away from wherever you have it mounted. And in this particular example, I only used 2 mounts so that you got kind of that, I don't know why I did, just for that look, but you could use 4 mounts, which would give you the ability to have 1, 2, 3 different sets of lights. So if this was themed for, say you had your theme that you were building was a Batman or a Superman mod or something like that, that had 2 red tubes and a blue tube, you could use red lights here, blue lights here, and red lights here so that your reservoir was tricolored with the lighting. You could do 4 different colors if you wanted. Whatever you wanted to do, the light doesn't, you're just not restricted. Again, it just gives you all these options to build what you're envisioning, as opposed to just having to force your build fit a stock reservoir. There is one other type of CCFL that fits down inside the tubes themselves, inside the tube reservoirs, and I do not have one to show you because they're not quite done yet, but they work just like our LED plugs do. I've got one of those to show you. This is the chrome version. Again, it comes in all 10 of our finishes. And basically you would install a plug into your end caps, or wherever you want to put them actually, and instead of looking like this, it would actually have a tube that, just like these tubes, whatever the color would be, that travels down into the reservoir. And then after you've secured that into your end cap, you then can slide the CCFL inside, and it would be just like this, except it would have a CCFL sticking out the end of it. You just slide it in there and tighten it down, and then you've got the bulb actually down inside your reservoir. And an interesting feature of that is you're not limited to just one bulb either. If you used, say, a 3-port on the bottom, you could have 3 CCFLs that were facing straight up into the case, and then you could put a 1-port on the top and have a single bulb going down in between the 3 bulbs that you just put up from the bottom. You wouldn't have to use 3, of course, but I'm just saying that's one of the options you could do. What that would allow you to do is have, again, for your Superman build, you could have 3 red bulbs coming up from the bottom and 1 blue bulb going down from the top, or it could be a nuclear reactor. You could do, UV green and then have a red one in the center. Whatever fits your build is the point. So we've really addressed the lighting, and not just as an afterthought where we've kind of just slapped an LED into something. I'm going to try and wrap this up because I know I'm taking too long. I want to reiterate again real quick that all the parts that you see here are wrapped or packaged and sold individually. There really isn't anything that's sold pre-assembled by us, by Monsoon, except for the standalone pump. And the reason we do this is because it's essentially one piece of kit. It doesn't include the fittings, of course. I just put those on there to show you just how beautiful they are in there. It's a beautiful pump, period. It ships with the low profile 12mm or 1/2-inch mount, but if you wanted to change the mounts for any reason, they are, again, all interchangeable, and the pump can be rotated the same as everything else, 60 degrees left or 60 degrees right. The pump could be used, like say you didn't want to add a pump to your tube reservoir, or you did, but you wanted a second pump for whatever reason, redundancy or whatever. You could have a second standalone pump mounted elsewhere in the system. They use our standard machined aluminum. I don't know if you can see, but down in there's a foam sound absorbing pad. This is machined aluminum. It allows you to keep your pump cool, so you're not transferring heat from the pump into your cooling fluid, which sort of defeats the purpose. The covers can actually be removed, and then you can adjust the pump to wherever you want your cord, and then have this turned to the right direction so the cord's coming out exactly where you want it to. They're the same ones we use on our very popular Monsoon 2 dual bay reservoirs. This is you can see everything matches, including the rotaries, the light port rotaries, the plugs. If you can see, there's a green plug on there, the blue plug. All these things are designed to match and work within the system. That includes the tube, as I covered. When I say fully modular, I want you to understand that I mean fully modular. This is our dual bay reservoir. You can remove my wife probably put this on. Remove the motor tube mounting cover. I'm going to set this aside. This is a backplate for that reservoir that you can remove the backplate because it is a modular system. So you just take out these screws, remove this backplate of your existing reservoir, replace it with this backplate, and as far as I know, this is the only reservoir in the market that allows you to attach a tube reservoir to a bay reservoir. And in this particular instance, I think that's a 200mm tube or 4-inch tube. I used the motor tube cover. You wouldn't have to. You could make this as long or as short as you want, and you could add the side ports. Picture this mounted to the front of your case. It then travels back to, say, right about here where your CPU block is. You've got the ports facing sideways. You literally just go straight out from here right to your CPU block, or this direction to your GPU, or whatever you want to do. My point being, you don't have to have the pump in on here like I put on, although it is pretty gorgeous. You just put your pump in there, screw it down until it's tight, and you've got one of the coolest reservoirs on the planet as far as I'm concerned. I probably forgot about 50 things that I wanted to mention. I don't want this to be a 2-hour video. I am going to do some individual how-to videos that cover the individual components in detail. That'll go over building everything from how to assemble a basic unit. Assembly is really simple. I mean, it's almost all the tools that are required are included, from the little hex wrenches. For some of the systems that require, for the end of the tension rods I mentioned, they've got those little wrench flats. We actually include a little wrench that fits over the end of those. Although my goal was to try and make the assembly more Lego versus less IKEA flat pack bookshelf, which is kind of frustrating. If you've ever watched anybody with Legos, you can just put a pile of Lego building blocks in front of them, whether they've ever messed with them or not, and they'll just instinctively know how things go together. And that's kind of the goal for this system. The videos will cover everything from how to build the most basic of systems, or configurations like this one, which is again just your basic tube reservoir, all the way up to, I'll do some on how to use the couplers and the different components that go into it, and I'll cover the different mounts and all those things. Hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry it was a bit stream of thought consciousness, but I tend to just try and cover the product in a kind of a realistic, less commercial way. I basically design parts that I'd want to use and I hope that you enjoy using. I'm also going to do a video on the configuration aspect of it so that you can figure out how to configure. You can determine the configuration for your build and then make sure you order all the components that you need. One other thing I wanted to cover is that in talking to some of our resellers, they're going to offer some of the more common configurations pre-assembled. We won't actually do the assembly, but they will. And a few of them are even going to offer custom assembly if you're there's no shame in not everybody's good at everything. So if you're great at one thing but not so comfortable with assembly, even though it is really simple, and I'll cover it in the videos like I said, if you're not comfortable with the assembly portion of it, they'll allow you to choose whatever configuration you want, and then they'll assemble it for you, ship it off to you already assembled and ready to go. Also, if you have any questions on the assembly, my email is going to be posted on the screen. I actually really enjoy hearing from our customers. I don't have a lot of time to do building anymore, so I sort of live vicariously through you guys' builds. So when I get pictures of what you're doing, it's kind of a lot of fun for me. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I really genuinely mean that. Just there are no stupid questions. Just email me. What I'm doing. I want to try and do this. What do you think? I will help you determine the configuration. I'm going to try and put together an online tool that lets you pick the different parts and drop them in place and try different configurations, and it'll give you a parts list and then tell you the dimensions and all those types of things. Any questions? Just use the email address on the screen and shoot me an email, and I'll do my best to answer it as quickly as I possibly can. Thanks for watching.